Hi, I'm Brad, but I'm a different Brad because it felt like a million pounds of weight has just lifted off my shoulders because I can now finally officially talk about an official new headset that Valve has announced and are going to release early spring. The Deckard project. It's here. But anyway, yeah. So before I talk about it, and I know there's way more going on with this really ecosystem play that Valve is doing here. I'm mostly going to be talking about the Steam headset, the Steam frame. And I'm actually going to be talking about it in a way that is not really talking about the specs or really the gameplay features or the gaming aspect of it. So if there's anything interested about that you are, this is not the place. I'm coming from this as someone who has been data mining this project for a while. Not only just data mining this project, but really across the entire hardware ecosystem that they've been building up to this day, because we've been seeing tidbits from the Valve Vader project early on, and we kind of knew that they were working on a console, Fremont they called it in the code names, and I knew there was a new controller called Ibex, later codenamed Triton, and just it's kind of wild how this is why data mining is so crazy, because you can just find the pieces of so many different either dead prototypes or different projects that are all going to meld together someday. And seeing it today, it all makes sense, and I can relax and just talk about it. But also, I'm coming from it as someone who I'm not really an influencer anymore, or at least I've never really seen myself as that anyway. I use products like this in a way that no other probably normal person will use Steam Frame or use this headset or any other headset. I'm just someone who cares about the technology and is very passionate about it. And I'm not here to sell you anything because, frankly, as a leaker, I'm not even allowed to touch these things early or get invited or try any of these headsets out and get like the whole press release sort of thing. There are other channels and other great channels and journalists who have covered this and are going to give you firsthand impressions of that device. So again, watch those first before you get my opinions on it. But I want to talk about the headset and really the ways that I see it, because for me, it's not just a VR gaming headset. Yes, they are clearly marketing it as that. Just like kind of Apple was marketing the Vision Pro as a spatial computer that only can do AR, but clearly it's a VR headset, right? It can do a lot of other stuff if the developers are there for it, and you can see that they've been getting VR controllers and pens and everything. It's all a marketing thing because they're more interested in getting their current customers interested in their device. And the same thing is here because, frankly, if you're Valve and you are trying to make a headset, a standalone headset, there are many, many easier ways to do a headset that doesn't involve building an entirely like VR-focused version of SteamOS, which is Linux. It's not Android, it's not anything else, it's Linux, pure Linux. And day one, in a way, you'll be able to go and get this headset, and if you're interested in it, you'll be able to find any Linux app, like Blender, for example, and you'll be able to build it for ARM and run it on this headset. Is literally, as they say, a PC you wear on your face. And that is the stuff I'm really interested in, and I can't wait to try out because I think this is probably the most closest to a full spatial computer that we've had, even though there's a lot of great ecosystems popping up right now related to spatial computing. And for me, I said this on my second channel, but it's like Christmas. This is everything I wanted. But there's also some weirdness with it, right? Like, this is clearly not an extremely high-end headset. This is having pretty old components, I would say, like the LCD panels, 2160 by 2160, even though it does run up to 144 hertz, and they got a semi-custom thing going on there. Great, very much like Index. And the persistence, it runs at 8% duty cycle. That is even faster than what the Valve Index ran back in when it came out. So they're very clearly prioritizing a lot of things such as visual comfort and just obviously the lack of motion blur, which makes sense for Valve. They've kind of always focused on that. But it sucks because even though this is something being targeted for taking your games on the go and playing it on a giant screen and do any apps that you might want that run on Linux, that resolution is frankly just going to be hard. But here's the thing, and this is what I want to kind of communicate, is this is a ecosystem play for sure. The day one, being able to use all your Steam library and all the Linux library, and more importantly, have the entire, I would say, Linux and DIY tinkerer base be able to come to this headset and do whatever they want with it and not be held back at all by any of the software locks. That is the stuff I'm interested in. And the fact that as well, they have a ginormous, they built a ginormous effort into emulation and compatibility layers. It takes what Steam Deck did with Proton, which is just transferring Windows calls and transferring it to Vulkan Linux calls. This is way further, extremely intense. They're going full-on x86 emulated VFX to ARM, and then also doing that Proton stuff with the Windows to Linux translation. And not only that, they're inviting Android developers to release Android apps to the Steam store, because guess what? They also have Waydroid, which I've talked about this before. Waydroid allows you to run Android apps on a Linux system. So it'll work even better, frankly, than Waydroid on an x86 system, because we all know that most developers that are building on Android are building for Android ARM. And because it's a Linux ARM computer, you'll be able to just translate those Android ARM calls to Linux ARM calls. And they've even said that if you have a VR game that is built for Android ARM and you sideload it to this headset, as long as it doesn't have any proprietary, like maybe meta stuff or anything else that requires from those SDKs, it will just work. So it is a huge effort. Valve didn't need to do all of that stuff just to release a new headset that is focusing on their ecosystem. They could have just said, hey, we're going to release a console and we're going to release a headset that just connects to that console, whether wired or wirelessly or whatever. But they didn't. They released an actual Linux PC, because for Valve, well, let's get into the weirder stuff. Valve is a very weird company in that you see all these big players coming in, Apple, Google, whatever, and they're behemoths. They have workforces, they have teams that are bigger than the entire workforce that Valve is. And Valve splits up their hardware teams, which is like maybe max 50 employees at the max, and they're doing all of these projects, a console, Steam Deck, the controller, the headset. And of course, they do hire a bunch of contracting companies and open source developers to help them. But there's a lot of difficulty in them being able to match sort of this crazy behemoth culture of like Apple, Google, Meta sort of thing in XR. So for them, it's a win-win because they don't have to develop as hard, keep developing as hard, which is kind of a bad thing for the regular consumer, which is why I don't see this as a regular consumer device or a maximum competitor to something like the Quest 3, because you can see when the Quest launches, it's up to Meta basically to add a bunch of features and new games and all this stuff, and everyone waits on Meta to do that stuff, right? But for Valve, they don't have that luxury where they can just release something and keep just adding so much value, like just from their teams alone. So they like to release stuff that are basically PCs and embolden people like the DIY community for hardware and stuff like the tinkerers and people who like to build open source software, people who like to make applications like OpenVR Space Calibrator, which allows you to basically do stuff like attach a Tundra's tracker to your head and allow your camera-based tracking headset to match with your full body trackers that are all Lighthouse system based. Valve is more incentivized to do that because they know not only does it like kind of embolden and allow people to innovate on their own hardware, but allows them to continue working on other projects. And that is also why you start seeing stuff like, frankly, that disappoints me in a way. I'm not going to hide it. You see stuff like the black and white pass-through on this headset, which actually is probably my biggest like gripe with it. I don't care how you feel about pass-through, but for me, I think color pass-through is like the biggest value add that we've kind of gotten from headsets. And having just full color, even just to see your environment, and especially when you're playing games and doing all of your applications in that overlay or spatial computing environment, you don't want to see your world in black and white. And I believe that the main reason why they did that is not only because the chip they chose, which is not an XR focused chip, doesn't have all that like sort of camera bandwidth to handle that, but also they would have to also develop in-house a bunch of camera perception systems that kind of are warping those both full color eyes alongside the SLAM systems that are happening that they're now using. This is a full black and white camera-based tracking system. Luckily, they added IR emitters, which is so important because even stuff like the Samsung Galaxy XR and the Apple Vision Pro, they all have IR emitters for hand tracking, and it also allows you to use these camera-based tracking headsets in the dark, which is basically, if you're not releasing a headset in the current year with IR emitters, a camera-based one, you're actually just kind of giving the middle finger to your customer and saying, no, you can only use these with the lights on, and you're not allowed to be in bed at late at night and browse things on the internet while you're wearing a headset. You freak like me. But it is still just really, it's one of those things where it's like they probably spent all of their resources putting all of this time and money into building the actual SLAM systems and the eye tracking systems, which is probably the biggest thing because this thing relies heavily on eye tracking. Now, they mostly focus on foveated encoding for the Steam Link stuff. And if you've actually used Steam Link with the Quest Pro since it launched like nearly 2.5 years ago or whatever, you've been beta testing this feature. So thank you, Quest Pro users who've been using Steam Link on that headset. You literally have beta tested a feature that Valve was building primarily for this device, but not too much because Valve frankly doesn't care if people buy this headset in mass quantities because Valve cares about getting people on the Steam store and playing Steam games, and that's why they've been releasing Steam Link for Quest, and now Pico and some HTC standalone headsets. We'll probably see it on Android XR/Google headsets as well. It doesn't matter to Valve. Valve wants to release something on their own that they had their stake as like an all-around device that does all these things that are comfortable for the mass majority of people visually, and it won't be my main driver for sure. I'm quite sure of that. It will not replace this thing, but it's really good to have a company like this do these very open hardware and software thing where people can just do whatever they want. I'm very excited for the expansion ports. The frunk on the Index, frankly, was a failure. It didn't do anything except extend a USB 2.0 port to your PC, and it actually kind of didn't work that well in some cases. But there's actually two full-on expansion ports, one for like data, audio, whatever, and the one by your nose is a full-on PCIe port, basically, which is crazy because you're actually plugging stuff directly into a computer, and that low latency connection to the actual chip, which is now, again, it's an ARM chip, but it's a PC built on mobile hardware. I'm someone who works at a company called EOZ, and we were trying to find hardware tinkerers in VR who have great ideas and try to bring those products to market. And when I see stuff like this, I can imagine just some really amazing stuff really just come from it, because I can imagine like people are disappointed that there's no BMR speaker system like the Index, but they can actually pass through audio in the port that's like right above your temple here, or your eyebrows here. And I can see someone release a hard strap that connects to this fully modular core to create a BMR thing or whatever. There's so many interesting things that the community could do. And that's the stuff I'm excited about. I'm not excited that much about the current hardware as it stands or what it'll release as. I'm excited for really the long-term longevity of tinkerers getting this thing, Linux developers, open source developers, maybe being more interested in VR, because frankly, even though the Index, when it launched, it was Linux compatible, but Linux was basically just a skeleton for Steam VR over the past, I don't know, 6 years or so that the Index has came out. They really just kind of abandoned it so they can focus on this version of Linux that they knew would work on, and of course the one that their console will work on to stream wirelessly. So there's a whole mass of DIY and tinkerer users that will come in to really do interesting stuff. And I hope, frankly, when I get it, the spatial computing stuff, they basically admitted, unfortunately, that none of that stuff is ready right now. They say they're, of course, going to have all that multitasking capability because, again, this can run a bunch of 2D apps, but they wouldn't let people even try them out because they said it just wasn't, frankly, ready. And that's the stuff I worry about most with Valve is they'll release this headset, and it's going to be like, I don't know, probably $800 or something. And it's not going to be supremely updated over the years by Valve. It'll be reliant completely on the community. But if there's a day where the community just kind of gives up on working on stuff for it, then it will kind of go in the way in the index where 6 years from now, maybe, when there's maybe not a new headset, just like from index to this one, then I don't know, we're just kind of talking about what could be or should be, and you see these competing projects from Apple and Meta just have so many extremely more features because even, let's be honest, day one, the Meta features and Apple features and Google features day one on their headsets are extremely high. There's just so many apps and so many things you can do in a context. You can still do VR because, again, Valve is releasing Steam Link and Virtual Desktop is releasing on these platforms. There is so much competition in this market, but that is why I'm excited to be in this market right now. I'm excited Valve is doing their way. Valve is the only one that would do this way and kind of get away with it. There's no other company that could do something like this and just really just breathe a fresh air of life among these niche communities in this niche ecosystem that we call XR, VR, whatever. So that's really it. I have no comments on just like whether or not I'll daily it or whether or not people should buy it, because I think most people actually probably will not buy it. They're being very 400 to 500,000 in the first year is how much they're kind of building for the device. And that just is kind of probably realistic to how many they'll sell in a pretty 1 year span or so. This is not a mass market product, but I never feel that XR is in a place right now where it will be mass market. Quest is doing great in its own thing, but it's subsidized and, you know, it's kind of overrun by children playing Gorilla Tag, which is fine. They can have that. I don't mind anymore. They can have that. But there's also a lot of people in VR who feel there's never been a gaming focused headset recently for maybe older people or adults, and this will probably be closer to that for those people. And I don't know. I know people probably see me as a shill for Valve, but frankly, I'm not going to use this headset as my main. I'm going to have a ton of fun messing with it. I'm going to have a ton of fun modding it. I'm going to have a ton of fun messing with the operating system, working with other developers and coming up with new ideas to develop for it. But I'm just excited. There's an actual spatial computer on the market that is a full spatial computer. But that's awesome. That's great. So many ecosystems popping up in XR, VR, AR, whatever you want to call it. I'm sorry if you wanted more opinions on like the actual hardware, but I don't see just the hardware for these things. I see the ecosystem promise, how things will integrate, amazing things like this new Steam controller that has IR LEDs, so you'll be able to track it when you're using it with the headset. That stuff is more valuable in the long term. The hardware can be changed, it can be upgraded, it can be modded, and maybe in the future there can be other headsets that run this new Steam OS VR, whatever they're going to call it, because that is the true value of this headset in this new ecosystem. And I'm very thankful for Valve, and not just Valve. I'm thankful for Valve. I'm thankful for everyone that's still making stuff. It's gosh, who would have thought, right? Who would have thought a couple of years ago even that we'd have so many options, even on just the tethered PC VR side. A lot of great stuff happening. So yeah, I hope I'll be able to get one at some point. But for now, I'm just gonna have a big sigh of relief that data mining Deckard is over for now. Hopefully there won't be a new codename that just pops up in a file somewhere in Steam VR in the next year, and I won't get back into this whole thing again for a while, and I can relax in my vacation here in China and Thailand as well, and other places. But yeah, don't be dismayed. Just be happy where we are, because this is a niche technology, and it's amazing that we have so many big companies and Valve-like companies here today. It's great. Yeah. See you next time in a year.